So we will continue with the panel discussion regarding data transfer. So Alexandre, you can already sit, and I will call the other panelists, Jean-Christophe and Hélène. So I hope that you are all as excited as I am to discuss about that challenging topic that is data transfer, because as you have seen, it's not always the easiest to apprehend nor to operationalize. So we will try to share together our experience and see what we can bring to the audience. So just to present myself, I'm Hélène Lecuivre, and I'm data protection lawyer at MyData-TRUST. Just as a quick reminder, we have Hélène, that is our specialist in, we will say, that has an expertise in the hospital, we will say, and apparently our entertainer for the event. We have Alexandre that will bring us his expertise regarding laboratories. And we have Jean-Christophe, why do I say that with the English accent? Jean-Christophe that will bring us his field of expertise regarding encryption. Correct. So what I would like is also to apologize on behalf of Oliver Patel. So it was supposed to come to us to this panel, but due to the COVID situation, it was not possible to come, so we will need to discuss it, the three of you and the fourth, of course. So what I would like is that we focus on two main topics regarding data transfer. So first of all, maybe I will remove my mask. It's regarding the choice of the appropriate tool of transfer. And then that we dig a little bit more regarding the so-called transfer impact assessment. So first of all, maybe I would like to ask you, Hélène, are you using often standard contractual clauses, and what are the most important challenges that you face when using it?
Well, I don't use them yet that often. I have, of course, a big heritage of some of contractual agreements accompanied by SCCs with the old ones. So that's okay, and I'm very happy that I already have those at least. And now I'm struggling to establish a kind of model based upon the new standard contractual clauses, knowing that we are not allowed to change the wording. But I want to have, nevertheless, some kind of checklist where we can say, well, we are the controller in that case, so we have to use the module 1 from the SCCs, but we are also a processor for the controller who may be the importer on the other side of the world. And then we will need to use the module 4 and then take care that additional clauses or safeguards will be in place. And that's the less easy piece of the work, I think. And well,
I think that you raised an interesting point by stating that the role qualification, so as controller or processor, is important, because you know that now in the standard contractual clauses, you need to pick the right module. And I would like to see also with Alexandre if it's difficult in your practice to actually assess your role as laboratory, your role when you're working with an hospital, your role when you're working with another vendor that is a laboratory.
Yes, it is, because actually we consider ourselves as controller when we receive analysis or requests for analysis from hospitals, because in our point of view, and I guess it's the way hospitals may see it as well, is what we decide the way we are going to do the analysis. So they are requesting for the medical information regarding a patient. Now it would be different if the hospital would tell us clearly, okay, you need to do this analysis this way with this kind of machine and so on. But it's not the case. What they need to do is to find some evidence for pathology or syndrome. So I would say that in that case we are a controller, but that's not easy actually to really define. And for example, we are one of the 8 genetic centers in Belgium, and actually the other genetic center, they consider that we work as the joint controller. So again, that's also different. Yes.
Okay, So from what I hear from both of you, actually, on a case by case, and depending the processing, and depending the actor with whom you are working, you may use a different module of the standard contractual clauses. So now let's imagine that we have picked the right module of the standard contractual clauses, and now comes the question, I need to fill in the annex, right? And there is an annex that asks us to put in place appropriate measures, and especially technical measures. And we need to do a so-called transfer impact assessment. So, Jean-Christophe, what would be your advice to someone that would ask you, what should I do? What should I do to have supplementary measures that will help me to have a sufficient standard contractual clauses in place?
I think one thing I would do is have an honest assessment of the criticality of the business, or of the maybe business in your world is not appropriate, but the importance of the project. Meaning, if you work on something that is not going to generate, a huge business for the company, or does not really impact, people's life in a very, dramatic manner, I think, honestly, going with Google and the like with the standard clause is enough. We should not, overcomplicate things. Now, on the opposite side, if you work on a super sensitive project, which is top confidential, and the management itself consider this as it's the future of the company or super critical for the business, whatever, then this is where you have to add the adding measures, and this is where. Yeah, then the working with the basic cloud services without any additional measures is an issue. Of course, if you're a big, as you experience, if you're a large client, then you have a better negotiating power with the cloud provider. If you're really big, like if you're a government, maybe. And if you're not, then this is where, okay, I'm a relatively small budget or a small company, but this is a high impact for my business. And for instance, is it likely that some competitors would love to have access to my data in other parts of the world? Then you have to think twice or three times. And this is where the encryption, additional measure of encryption makes sense. Or, what you see on the market, the market is always very responsive. So now you have, I will not name names to add, to make some publicity, but you may have them in mind, is that some US cloud providers then work with European partners who have the key of the encryption and who process on your behalf, so with under European rule. And yes, this is clearly a better protection. Is it sufficient? Then we can discuss in details, but not necessarily, but certainly it's better.
I would like to dig a bit more with a specific case, but maybe before that, I would like to ask to our DPOs, do you feel that you really have the choice, for instance, with a cloud service provider? Because you say, as a DPO, but there is a risk regarding data transfer, but are you really heard within your organization, and do you feel that you really have a power regarding this?
Well, having a choice, probably not. It would be, for example, in our laboratory, we have a nice server room with the floor is higher than the external floor. We have backup power. We have fire detection, and so on and so on. But having a security measure like you could have in a big company like Google, probably not. And just to give you something, you don't think of all the possible scenario, but just to give you a short history or story about the history of the IPG. Well, it's 20 years ago already. We were processing forensic samples back in those days. And in the morning, one day in I don't know why, it was in 2003, you had guys with guns coming to the lab and taking hostages because they want to destroy some of the samples concerning what they've done. And so, well, what you can do there, it's a risk, okay, it can happen. It probably will never happen again, but the impact was really high, of course. And using your, I was talking about the governmental access. well, what is the probability they are going to access to your specific data? Probability is probably really low. The impact can be really high in terms of data privacy. Again, it's risk management, I guess, at one point. But risk zero doesn't exist, so you have to, at one point, to make a choice. And we are talking about patient here, and I think that the patient, at one point, you have to inform the patient. But when I was talking about the genetic disease and so on, when you see them coming, we have a psychologist available as well in the Institute, because, of course, it is dealing with important disease for those patients. So I guess you have to make a choice at one point. That I don't think it will be possible not to use the cloud service provider at one point. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Now I have a hole here, black hole. So, sorry. Yes, I fully agree with Alexandre, and I would add that I think the law was a little bit faster than the reality in Europe. So European data centers, cloud providers were not really at the same level of performance and security offerings than, for instance, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, web services. So that's the reason why plenty of users, organizations are already using those cloud providers. Now, for our hospital, for instance, that's not the case. Everything is still in our own data center, and our IT department struggles to keep it in their own data center. So they don't want to hear about MS 365 or something like that. They are really against this solution, but I think at the latest, in 5 years, they will be obliged to switch to the cloud. It's not possible to offer the same security and protective measures as in a data center or in a cloud service, really worth to be called like that. And then there is this EU border project where Microsoft, of course, participates. And we will also find, I'm sure, Amazon and maybe Google. Well, then, again, they will, of course, sign contracts and oblige themselves to inform the data controller or data owner before giving access to the authorities in the USA, for instance. And they are very transparent. And again, here it comes up to be very pragmatic or do this risk analysis. Is the FBI really interested to know if you have diabetes or something like that? No. Probably not. Well, but when it comes to a data breach, then it will be interesting for insurance companies to know if, or for banks to know if you are in good shape or not, because before they will give you credit to buy a house, they will try to know if you will be able to reimburse, so, or something like that. And finally, maybe, is there something from Data Protection Authority in the room or connected? Because I would like to say, just stand up, evaluate and assess the risk, the probability, and then say, end of 2022, hopefully we will have our health data hub here in Europe. And then we will be able to continue to use or start using those cloud services in a very secure, in a better, secure manner. Let it be legal or technical security.
Thank you. And actually, I think you raised something interesting. Is that actually the law that will not apply the same way to all the sectors and to all the actors. So actually, we need to understand that a transfer impact assessment is a case-by-case analysis. And that's why I would like to raise a question to you, Jean-Christophe. What do you think? Do you think, for instance, I will take an example of a sponsor that would be abroad, not in the European Union, for instance, in the US or in China. Is it a good advice to tell them to keep their data in a cloud in the European Union? Or would it be another advice to say, okay, you can keep your cloud elsewhere, but then you need to have an additional layer of encryption with the key in the European Union?
Yeah, that's, I think, a good question. And I think the way, maybe it's too broad as an answer, but I would say to begin with, also when you may have the discussion, then you think about the next step. I mean, when you talk to your European authority, what are you going to say? And I think when you engage, I mean, in this discussion with your sponsor, I think it's fine to be honest about the fact that at some point we cannot trust the other side, and we should be open about this. And very much building on the point from the two of you, Alexandre and Hélène, I think it's okay. The big picture is Europe is losing on the business and innovation side for a number of years now, and it will be very hard to recover. And at the same time, we are winning ground on the, let's say, the political approach of the way we think about privacy is much stronger, and we are actually gaining ground. And the US realize that the way they think about privacy is weak, and at some point is ultimately wrong for the business. So when you discuss with sponsor, the thing is, okay, let's say you do a deal with Google Cloud and everything. The more you come close to a European approach, and then, as you say, you invite them to host the information, I mean, in Europe or along the European regulation, the more you do this, and you tell them because simply there is no trust in the way you think about privacy in your part of the world. If you do this, and if you have this type of discussion, then if the sponsor agrees, I mean, then perfect, because then you are really safe. If they don't agree, but you can record in a way, make clear that you had this discussion and you have pushed as hard as you could to get them come to you in terms of regulation and rules, then, I mean, you make you safer for the future. Let's say that they disagree to go as far as you wanted in terms of where the information is processed and according to which regulation and so on. But you can prove that you tried as hard as you could, but you're an SME, what could you do in front of a bigger company? Well, I think if you use this, if you record or keep some information on this, you show your vision, your good faith, and when you do have issues, if you have issues, you can show, I think, look, we tried our best. Another thing is, if you, back to the point of that you made a few times also in our preparatory calls, when you say, look, what can I do in front of giant companies? It's not easy, but collectively, I mean, let's say that, I mean, this is my same issue with the encryption companies. I mean, they are super small companies. And I said, look, I mean, you are super small. No one knows you. But, I mean, you are experts in your field. You know who you are, where you are. You are very transparent. So this is a strength. So if you go to a parliament or to change a law or to regulatory authority, I mean, 10 small companies of 10 people is as powerful, in my opinion, as Google plus Microsoft plus, because credibility, being local, and so on. So what is missing, and this is a call to all of you, and is that the health sector and the small companies in the health sector, you do not, I mean, you do underestimate your power. It's just a matter of connecting this. I don't know if there is a European DPO health sector association or whatever, but if there was one, my God, you would be super influent, and you would go to the European data EDPB. You would, I mean, with a few meetings, I mean, the big companies would go crazy because you would say, okay, my problem number one is this. I mean, problem number two is this. What can you do? And you would have a lot of. I mean, this would be a different life for you, in my opinion. Sorry, it was a kind of very broad answer to your specific question, but
maybe I will leave the floor to the audience. But from what I hear from you, maybe, it's just that if all the DPOs are going in the right direction, maybe we will have more power than against it.
Even a handful, I mean, the people in this room. I mean, you don't need to be, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I do this all the time, so I can reveal a trick, but you do something with a few handful people that really have, of course, educated opinion on something, and then you say, we do this, and it's surprising how people do not really challenge who you are, what you do. It's very surprising. So, but I don't hear this myself from the health sector. So if there is 3-4 people in this room who want to come together, and you would have such an impact.
Okay.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe.
Thank you very much. So it's now time for some questions. Maybe we can start in the room. Yes?
Let's be honest, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, they are outside the law. And the fine they receive, it's peanuts, right? Small companies don't have any solution out there. I give you an example. A big cloud provider for health data, the encryption key sits with Amazon. This is the business model. You cannot change it. So my question is, instead of individually trying to fight against and to put in place some compliance that obviously in theory looks very good, but in practice it's really a big failure, why not lobby that we have first solution and then we apply the law? Because it doesn't work, obviously. So what are your thoughts on this? What should actually be like open, the first step? Not the law, the solution. We don't have solution.
May I also just add something from my point of view as an IT service delivery manager, which I was before becoming a DPO. There are architectural IT measures available, but they cost much more, that's correct. But before transferring your data to Amazon, you are able normally to implement a solution, a technical solution, to encrypt those data and to keep the key yourself. And if on top of that Amazon wants to put his own encryption key on it, let them play, because your data will be encrypted before. So it is possible, but it costs much more money. That's correct.
Yes, but then you choose between doing the business and actually going in bankrupt. So it's really a risk-based type of approach, but you do have ethics committees and you do have data protection authorities that will forbid you to do that business specifically because it's not really according to the law. But then when you look at the solutions in EU, they simply don't exist. That was also the case of Health Data Hub in France. There are zero solution, and I'm not sure they found one yet.
Then maybe, excuse me, maybe just instead of struggling how we circumvent and how we sign contracts and so on, we should ask governments to give us the money.
Support that, exactly. Support that and make these companies not being able to conduct their business in EU unless they reach some standards. And then it's okay. We do have choices, right? Because they will need to invest, those private companies will need to invest to comply. But here we need the help of authorities, and we don't have that. Again, we have very good law, but in practice doesn't work.
I think, Jean-Christophe, you had something to add, and then maybe after we have other questions from the audience.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think the regulation is coming, but it's brand new, so it's only a few years, which is, considering the complexity, is recent. Solutions, yes. I mean, I will be biased, so I don't know exactly the issues you have in mind, technical issues, but I know people who have solutions, European companies, and they don't find the clients because they don't have the marketing power or the influence. So there are solutions available on the market, but they are not very well known, and they are new, and big companies don't want to buy solutions from small companies, European companies, because they don't trust them. So there is a cost, but there is also the trust. I mean, what is this company? 10 people in this company, can I really, trust them? But sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot. So it's also difficult. So question of cost, question of trust, and regarding the companies, these companies are super smart. Obviously, they are very successful, and don't underestimate their capacity to listen to weak signaux faibles, weak signals, do we say? Like very low. I mean, you don't need to raise an army of people for these companies to notice and respond. So, but of course, if there is no one, then of course they have their free movement. So, so it's a matter of connecting the demand you have, this provided of solution. They exist, but they are very small, and then also, working together for you to raise your profile.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe.
Yeah, so we have 3 nice questions from remote audience. The first one is to ask the speakers and the panel if they have any experience with using the questionnaire that goes with the SCC. So that's about the SHREM questionnaire. This is one. The other one is a kind of reminder and a question at the same time. The new SCCs do apply indeed to an agreement between an entity submitted to GDPR, obviously the importer, the exporter, and the entity which is outside of the scope of GDPR. And most of our contracts are between 2 entities in the scope of GDPR, so there is a question about how far we can, in fact, use the new clauses while waiting the other set to be done. And the last question that I spotted is, well, we have this triangle in clinical trials where, let's say, the sponsor would be in the US, there is a CRO, whether the CRO would be, let's say, in Europe or outside, and then there is a site. So there is a question where the SCCs needs to be put in place. So are the SCCs between the site and directly the US sponsor, or are the SCCs between the European CRO, but not the site and the CRO, and so between European CRO and the sponsor? So like how to manage this in this triangle. So those are 3.
So regarding the questionnaire, maybe Hélène, because from what I know, Alexandre, you are more using the derogation, but maybe we can speak about that after. But
Well, that's a tough one. And I would say I would not like to answer like that without having done some research or investigated a little bit more. It's really a trap.
but so for now, you never experienced a situation where you use the questionnaire?
No. The questionnaire, which questionnaire? Because
so
I didn't
to
get
help you
Yes.
to do your data transfer impact assessment.
Yes.
So you ask to your data importer,
Yeah.
are you subject to the law? Do you
No.
have additional measure in place?
Not directly like this questionnaire like that, no. I first of all asked them, send me everything you have to prove that you have all measures in case.
It's not a questionnaire, it's more that you
no.
ask a direct question to them.
Yes, yes. But I'm still working on it, so for the time being, well, I'm overwhelmed because I have so many requests that I don't even have the time to prepare my own tool or to, that's it. And for the time being, hospitals do not invest in additional time for lawyers or DPOs, but they invest for nurses because of the COVID
and regarding
and that's what we have every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. Regarding the question of the standard contractual clauses, actually what we realize when discussing together is that I'm not sure that everyone is aware of the scope of application of the standard contractual clauses. So we have the old one, if already signed before September, that are still valid until 2022. Then we have the so-called new standard contractual clauses released in June that are only applicable where your data importer is not subject to the regulation. And then potentially we will have new set of standard contractual clauses for importers subject to the GDPR. So it means that in the meantime, in the majority of the circumstances, we are not supposed to use the new standard contractual clauses. But when I discuss with you, what I realize is that a lot of partners, of your partners, are not even aware of that scope of application. So they are still using the standard contractual clauses.
So
yeah, and it was my question there, and really it was advice, really. Mark Jones from UCB. is that we already have the situation where we send to collaborators, many of them professors or hospitals, and they're already put off by lots and lots of documentation, all the clauses at the back. And to be honest with you, we're struggling to think about how we get that questionnaire to them in a way that brings the right quality information back, but doesn't also cause them to say, hey, we're not going to collaborate with you, this is just too much. And it's really, if anybody had any advice as to how they might have worked with that.
I'm not sure that I understood every single word of your question, because unfortunately the quality of the sound was not very good for my old ears, maybe even for younger ones. But well, that's correct. It's difficult to, and you never know who should really answer which questions. It depends on the role you have. Are you the controller? Are you the processor? Are you a joint controller? Are you a processor to a processor? Or did you sign an agreement from the sponsor to the processor, and then the processor contacts the hospital for as being another processor? So it's rather complex. And I think that's the reason why we should think about it all together and try to make it clear. We have that situation. Normally you are that you are a controller or a processor or a sub-processor and so on. And then, yes, then we can base our method on that.
And maybe to reply to the third question of Anastasia, if I remember well, you told me that from your experience, as an hospital, you always sign with sponsor and not with the CRO, the standard contractual clauses.
Yes. For me, the CRO is a processor for the sponsor.
So, yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, I wanted to ask you, there are some other questions in the room.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for this informative session. It was really very interesting. I come from CRO world, and indeed it's one of the super complicated situations that we are put in particular that in the pharma and biotechnology, things move way too quickly. To sit down and look on how and who plays which role and all of these things. In particular, that although that the GDPR comes from the EU, it is not being interpreted similarly in each of the countries in the EU. And that is leading to serious confusion, and in particular when you're working with non-EU sponsors or companies, that becomes even more challenging to explain why each and every country is taking it differently. It's not really a question more to just provide a remark about how do we, the whole conversation was about transferring the data, and we're trying to see now that the best way is not to actually. That is, if we want to really comply by the book, it is not to transfer. Because transferring with the way it's presented and allowed, if we want to play it by the book, it's going to be borderline impossible. But do we see something that will be technically possible for, whether from the authorities or from private sector, where we have a measurement, a way that we can see, okay, country X is possible, company Y is in compliance with the GDPR, although not being non-EU, because we have in the IT world, you have the penetration test, for example, and you get a certificate that this company is safe, etc., and the data with it. But for GDPR, to see how the compliance can be, will we see the EU entering such kind of domain to allow actually the business to continue in the EU? Otherwise, as you mentioned before, we're going backwards on the business in the EU. Thank you.
Jean-Christophe?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point. I think I mean, I don't know if it's a sad situation or just reality, but people who tend to ignore the law, and when they are successful, I mean, they're basically forgiven. There is an expression we say, better forgiven than ask for permission, so something like this. And so again, I think if you're at risk to lose I mean, like a big project because of GDPR, I mean, any sound business decision would be to go ahead. I mean, maybe I should not this on record, but that's the reality. And then, but show, I think if you want to be forgiven, you have to show that you tried to really balance things. And because you had, if you can show that there was a state of confusion and that either you were going ahead or you were losing the project, then I think once the time of kind of the judgment or the court case comes, then you can say, look, I knew it was a risk, but I had to do this, otherwise we would losing lives of people or we would lose business or whatever. And honestly, I think this would stand in court. I mean, at some point, keep the big goal in mind. Big goal is for Europe to really convince the rest of the world that they have the right privacy approach, and you, in your role, you are, I mean, a shoulder, I mean, you are part of this. If you say, okay, I was put in an impossible situation, so I took a risk, but I did my best to protect the privacy of my clients, or, I mean, I think, a business decision is to go ahead with as much protection as possible.
Yes, so this is the risk appetite and make the balance between the benefit, the profit, and the fees you will have to pay in case. But there is still, in the GDPR, normally a certification that should be established and defined and recognized by the data protection authorities. If I remember well, I don't know it by heart exactly, but normally they should work on it, and we should obtain something that will allow us to certify, yes, you are GDPR compliant. So this is normally expected. Not yet there. Again, the law was before the reality.
Yes, if I can add to this, is what I also mentioned earlier, is that in our sector, at least for myself, I would need very precise guidelines on what to do with this example, with other as well. As I mentioned, in Belgium, there are those 8 genetic centers, and some of them are completely using the cloud, some of them are not using the cloud, and then we are in between, we don't know yet. But how come 8 genetic centers have different approach on something so specific to GDPR? That I don't understand, in fact. So that's what we are expecting and looking for.
Thank you very much. So we only have 2 last minutes because we have then if we want to do a quick break of 10 minutes. So I will give just a last question that you have, Anastasia. Then just for the online audience, we are trying to answer all of your questions in the chat. We'll give to Anastasia a last question and then we'll do a break.
Well, thank you. My question actually inspires from something that I read in the chat. So the situation where we can use or not use the new SCCs in our case is not clear. The CNIL orally says you shall, the Belgian authorities orally say you shall not. So what shall we do? My question is slightly provocative. Given that the new SCCs as such do not apply to many of our situations, shall we or can we, as ethical committees are pushing us to, fall on derogations such as informed consent?
Well, yes and no. I should have become a politician, not a DPO. Well, informed consent, why not? Why not, as long as it depends on the number of data subjects, maybe. It depends, again, on the type of data categories. And, again, you have to assess the risk behind it. But not only for the business, because the big difference, GDPR, the risk is for the data subject. You always have to look at that. What risk is for the data subject if something happens with his data or her data? And that's the question we have to raise. And then we can say, okay, it seems acceptable, or just in case, ask the data protection authority. They are there for that also. And maybe they will tell you, yes, you can go ahead, you have put in place enough security measures. Or no, you can't, stop it. And then informed consent, well, I saw also that there is often a confusion between informed consent for clinical trials and then the informed consent for what we will be doing with the personal data. And that must be really very crystal clear. So on the one hand, we will inform you that if we make this and that, maybe your health will get better, maybe it will not, and so on. And you will contribute to make the science grow, improve and going ahead. And or yes, but my data maybe can be accessed outside of the EU. So sorry.
And maybe I will dig a bit deeper on Anastasia's question. But you told me that sometimes sponsors ask you to rely on consent, right? But I would like to have your opinion. What is better for you? Rely on SCC that are outside scope and sometimes with no sufficient measures? Or rely on a derogation that are supposed to be an exceptional regime? And that we know that for a consent to be valid, we need to have some conditions, such as specific consent, the fact to be informed and so on, but at the same time, in some countries, for the processing of data as such, consent is already asked. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we can withdraw consent is the same, actually. So what is the worst for you, actually?
For me, the worst remains the consent. Why? Because the data subject, the patient, is not really, for me, someone who can freely give his consent in this situation. He will always fear that if he says no, then maybe he will not be treated correctly and so on. So the consent should really be the last legal basis that you can use. And then, even if the SCCs for you are maybe some oversized or out of scope, they are still giving a kind of roadmap, what you have to consider and what you have to address.
And I don't know if we have time, Anastasia, or it's no?
10 seconds to conclude.
10 seconds.
Conclusion.
Just a last thing regarding derogation, maybe because I think it was interesting, because Alexandre told me that you use often a derogation as well. Often. Okay, sometimes if you prefer.
Sometimes.
But you rely on another derogation, and I would like that you tell us more.
Well, in fact, when we do genetic analysis, we, of course, as I mentioned, work with the different genetic centers in Belgium. But for some, and it's not regular, right? I insist on this. It's sometimes. Sometimes. If we need a specific expertise and it's in the US, we are going, of course, to send a sample and ask for analysis from an expert in the US. If we don't have this analysis done in Europe, and this is something new, of course, this is something where we are going to do. And there we are going to use this derogation to process the sample with this expert in the US, for example. Yes.
So you would use the derogation of the contract, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I can add something and then I will shut up. So this expert will then contribute to a vital interest for the person. And then you have the balance. And I think that's everything you need to know. The person will survive or not. What is better? Keep his data here and he will maybe die or be ill for the rest of his life, or maybe something can go on there and maybe better.
Yeah, I think it's a good conclusion.
Perfect. So nice. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion.